hear me? Yes. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you all for coming. This event was originally planned to be for something else, but when we found out the date of this event, we changed it to a fundraiser for Grenfell for Christmas for Grenfell, which is giving presents to all the children who've been affected by the fire, whether around the building or anywhere in the community that's had trauma from the fire. And we've got the guy who set up the fundraiser here. He's just put his hand up, and he'll be speaking later to let you know more about that. Have you all been on the march? Yes. I mean, I'm still quite frozen. And yeah, I'm quite cold as well. I shouldn't have taken my jacket off. I'm shivering a bit. But we've got some great people to speak here, and we've got some people who are performing some poetry. So without any more from me, our first person on stage will be Arthur Smith, who's come along from South London. Please make some noise for Arthur Smith.
I was on the march, and it was a kind of humbling and wonderful thing, and I feel honoured to be here. Anyway, I'm going to just do a couple of poems. I might do one or two little jokes. In fact, since we're all Londoners, knock knock. M-A-B, it's a big horse. M-A-B, it's a big horse, I'm a Londoner. But I'm going to recite a couple of poems. They're quite short, don't worry. And the best thing, if you're reciting a poem, it's good to have a little bit of applause at the end as a kind of grammar. But unfortunately, when you're doing poems, obviously, often you don't know when it is the end, if you're in the audience. So, when I say thank you, I've finished. And at that point, you can wake up and start clapping. No, this first poem is by Philip Larkin. And it's, anyway, it's called The Mower. The mower stalled twice. Kneeling, I found a hedgehog rammed up against the blades, killed. It had been in the long grass. I'd seen it before, and even fed it once. Now I had mauled its unobtrusive world unmendably. Burial was no help. The next morning, I got up, and it did not. The first day after a death, the new absence is always the same. We should be careful of each other. We should be kind while there is still time. Thank you.
Our next speaker now, he's in the Save Our Silchester campaign. Have you all heard about this? Yes. Well, without any more from me, Piers Thompson. Is he here? Is he here?
I'm Piers Thompson.
Here's Piers Thompson.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming tonight. After the fire, in some ways, there was a moment of adrenaline charge. You know, we saw this terrible thing, and I know my personal response to it was to get out, to talk, to fight, to support. But we're now 6 months later. I mean, many of you will have been on the silent march this evening. And you know what? We are traumatised here. I hardly accept it myself, but in my own household, my daughter has PTSD. She's 14. She saw 71 of our neighbours and friends burning to death. And she can't deal with it, I can't deal with it, my wife can't deal with it. In many ways, we'd like to go back to how we were on the 13th of June. You know, I was a bohemian dilettante. We were a family with all our normal problems. But that night, the whole world changed. And it's given us an awesome responsibility. You know, what we saw that night cannot be unseen. It's changed us all, and we can't go back to not caring, which many of us were doing before the fire. We have to plough on. You know, I almost miss the days when I'd sit around with Edward Defoe, you know, talking about Silchester and how to save it. And we'd shout into the abyss and no one would listen. Then we had the fire, and the day after, literally everyone in the world was sticking a microphone in your face. So we have to fight on. And, you know, a lot of you, well, I believe, you know, in the fairness of the world, but it's really not going the right way at the moment. We're in Silchester. I come from Silchester. It's the sister estate to Lancaster West. We're the other side of the railway. We were fighting regeneration. Our friends and neighbours helped us. They supported us shoulder to shoulder. We share a pub. We share a convenience store. That night, we lost them, and we cannot allow their deaths to be in vain. We applied at Silchester RA, Residents Association, we applied to be a core participant, a CP, on the Grenfell inquiry. We thought, well, you know, we'd seen them clad the tower, we'd seen them, we'd experienced the contempt and disregard that the rotten borough has for ordinary working people. We knew, we had valuable insight. We have been refused core participant status on this inquiry. They're not interested in what 500 households who lived next door saw over 5 years. The next thing that's happened is we've seen that many of our friends and neighbours right now are being smeared. There's a campaign that started in the Times with a man called Dominic Kennedy, who I got in touch with him because I heard he was trying to smear Eddie Defoe, and I think I managed to stop him doing that. But they're smearing our friends, our supporters, the people, ordinary people who have just tried to fight for the rights of people not to have their homes demolished. And this isn't, you know, random. This is a deliberate, targeted campaign. There's one person who the Daily Mail picked out, Kurdi Gallardo. She's a lady in a wheelchair. I mean, I radicalised her. I remember giving her the first leaflet explaining that the borough wanted to, in cahoots with developers, knock down all our houses, scatter our community, enclose our green spaces. And on Monday night, I saw her, a picture of her in a wheelchair, accusing her of being some kind of far-left activist, hijacking Grenfell for her own purposes. I mean, I don't know, some of you may know about Haringey and the HTV situation there, where £2 billion worth of assets were about, or are about, to be handed over to Lend-Lease, a developer that also has some weird financial instrument. Now, ordinary people like you guys in the Labour Party have deselected 17 of the candidates who wanted to hand over public assets. Yet, that is some kind of far-left insurgency. So, the one thing I have learned in my time, first fighting to save our homes, and then in the effort we're all making here to make sure that Grenfell will not be forgotten, swept under the carpet, is we have to be united. We have to be united, and they are setting out to divide us now. Whether it's the smear campaigns, you know, whether it's misquoting Ishmael or Sid, they're setting out to divide us. And we have to stay together, we have to support each other, because we need justice for Grenfell, we need justice for other people in social housing in RBKC, and we need justice for people throughout London and the rest of the country. Remember, your home is at risk.
guy called Defoe, the director of Harrow Club.
Okay, yeah, no, we've just been on a march as well. We've been to St Paul's this morning. And I'm just here to talk to you guys just a little bit about the young people we work with and how they've been affected by this great disaster, I'm afraid. So, obviously on the night of the 14th, we opened our building at 3 AM. When I got the call from one of my workers who said we need to open a building, Grenfell was on fire. So we did that. We became a relief centre overnight. Then we became a donation centre after that. And we continued to give donations up until this point anyway, because obviously there's a lot of people displaced in hotels, in hospital at the time. So we felt that we needed to do something because obviously there was a void from RBKC and TMO, sorry. So therefore, we tried to do as much as we could. Over the past 6 months, we've put on extended programs for the young people. We've had counselling for the young people, and also residentials to get them out of the area. One of the main concerns for the young people at this present time is actually looking at Grenfell. I was a part of the residents' meeting. I chaired the residents' meeting to make sure that we tried to get some order. We tried to make sure that everybody had a voice. During that time, in August, I do believe it was, Mrs. Campbell said that the building would be wrapped within 12 weeks. And it's still not wrapped now. And I know this is affecting a lot of young people who still live in the flats opposite, and also on their way to school, on the way home. And they actually feel that it's a bit like a ghost town. This is how one young lady described it to me, because she wasn't sure how to approach people. People wasn't approaching each other anymore. They were scared of maybe upsetting people for what they said. So for the young people, they actually saw a lot on that night. I know we all want to protect our young people when they're growing up, but unfortunately, that night, a lot of young people saw things that they shouldn't have seen. They've taken on board. A lot of young people don't know how to process it. They might not know how to express it. And it's coming out in a variety of different ways in terms of, especially young people going to the local school, KAA, exhibiting kind of behaviour issues, which some of the teachers are seeing as bad, but I know the young people are actually going through some form of trauma. A lot of it haven't materialised yet, and I'm sure that, probably 12 months down the line, there'll still be people suffering, especially young people suffering from this, and they just don't know how to relieve themselves from this in terms of processing it all. And some of them have seen counsellors, some of them haven't. So for me, it's about continuing my work with young people and making sure that they get all the support and help they need in this present time, and also make sure that in the future that we can protect them, nurture them, and make sure that they become part of our community, which they are. They're the next generation of our community around here. And if we don't invest in them, and even the borough want to cut 9% of our funding, all right? And even after the fire, we even went back to them and say, are you going to reinstate that 9% of funding? And they said no, which was shocking to us, really, at that present time. They have provided some funding for us through the coalition from John Lyons Charity, who have done a lot of work in getting a load of people around the table, funders around the table, to make sure that we can have funding to work with these young people and their families as well. Because as you realise, a lot of parents talk about it, express their feelings about Grenfell, and sometimes these young people can hear and feel. At the beginning, a lot of young people were joining the marches, some of them positive, some of them negative, but at the same time, they were there and they experienced just as much as any adult. And I know that it's affected my staff team and the people that we work with, so let alone knows how it's affecting the people who have lost loved ones. Okay? Thank you.
We've got Bakhtiar and Tabassum Awan from the Manaar Muslim Cultural Centre. Are you both coming up together?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your attendance tonight. I'm going to be speaking about some of my experiences during the Grenfell tragedy and also about what Manaar has been doing. I'm a volunteer at Manaar. I became an Manaar volunteer on the 14th of June, the day I saw outside my flat that there was a row full of fire brigades. So I tried to go towards the tower to see if I could support and help. Then I heard about a centre called Manaar that was opening up to provide shelter services. So I walked into Manaar, and since that day I spent 2 weeks just helping out the centre, and I was inspired by the people of Manaar, and especially Abdurrahman Saeed, who unfortunately can't be here tonight. So Manaar has provided help in many ways. Some of the basic things were organising community meetings, helping on liaising with other centres, and then some of the more creative and incredible ways have been things such as art therapy for children. They provided funeral services to no faith, any faith, all religions, free of charge at the centre. They were also, they've opened up a kitchen so that people from, survivors from the Grenfell Tower can come in and basically go in, cook and use it as their home. So they've been very, very thoughtful, because these are the things that we can sometimes overlook. We can think that, you know, people have gone into hotels now, they're eating, they're being well fed, but we forget about the simplicities, and Manaar went beyond and helped them on all sorts of things, such as the kitchen facilities as well. I would like to pass over to Mohammed Bakhtiar, who will also speak about some of the experiences.
Thanks. Thanks for giving me a chance. After the Grenfell national disaster, I always, from day one, I said this is national disaster. I am still shocked that it hasn't been dealt with as a national disaster, and the national government didn't treat it as a national disaster. This is the biggest tragedy so far, in my view. I believe representation after the fire, I started thinking, what could we do? What could the communities do? Representation, in my view, is one of the big issues. We have councillors sitting in the council chamber for over 50 years, ranging between 20 to 50 years, and we have at least half of the councillors like this. I don't name any party, political party, but at the end of the day, they are representing the communities in the borough. One other issue, half of the population in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, people were born outside of the UK. Regardless if they were immigrants, asylum seekers, or whatever. We have Russian, French, German, European, people from Asia, people from Middle East, living in this country, in this borough. That hasn't been reflected in the chamber. We should be pressing for that. And I personally see we should work, lobby for having a rule, or it will take some time. We shouldn't allow any elected member, locally, in London or nationally, shouldn't stand for more than 3 to 4 terms. If you are a councillor or an MP for 20, 30, 40 years, you will lose touch with your community. You don't know what they want. You are not representing them. You would be solely representing your thoughts and ideas and ideologies. I remember in one of the meetings, a Tory councillor said we were interviewing a new chair for the planning department, the planning committee in the council. It was a big table, 8 of us sitting on that table. He said, "How could we break the Berlin Wall?"
The what?
Berlin Wall. This is North Kensington. This is how they see it. This is how he sees it. He wants to get rid of people, left thinkers, people like ourselves. This is what he's interested in. He doesn't care where this money coming from, how the money is spent, spending 20, 30 million on one road just to make it look nice, and closing children's centers and closing down families, supporting. I met many local residents. They have very local issues, small issues. It could be solved with £1,000, maybe £2,000. A lady I met this evening, she's a housing association tenant. She's fallen down on the stairs 3 times so far because the stairs aren't safe. And we can't do anything about it because we can't enforce it. It's not a new application. We should find ways around this. So we should stick together, as one of the speakers said. We should stay together, should stay united. All groups came out, very positive things came out of this disaster. We should stick together and try make changes to better. But the most important thing, we should work on towards having a rule, not allowing any representative to stand more than 3 to 4 times. Thank you.
We're going to hear from the man who set up this crowdfunder to raise money while we're all here. And he lives outside London. He needs to go soon. But please, can you give a warm welcome to Stevan Racz.
I lost my uncle to the Grenfell Tower fire on June 14th. And it was such a horrible time, those 3 days, because on the Wednesday morning when my partner woke me up, he went, "Isn't that somewhere you used to live?" I went, "No, my uncle lives there." And when I phoned my dad was in tears. And I was saying, "Dad, what's up?" He's gone, "We don't know where Dennis is. We don't know." And I was panicked. I didn't know what to do. And I went to work, and I was trying to do my job, and my boss walked in, and I was shaking. I said, "Look, I can't be here." She went, go to your family." I went and picked my mum and dad up, and my brothers, and we went down to my nan's, who was the hub. And from there, it was like it was like you see in the movies and stuff, like where people are going, like, like trying to sort out things. And we were hearing messages left, right and centre. "Oh, somebody's heard on Facebook that he's okay." And then you try and go back to that person on Facebook, and then they tell you it was from somebody else. And then you get back to them and they tell you it was from somebody. And then it just ended up like with silence. There was nothing there. And I was running around all the places where the evacuees were going, the Rugby Portobello, the West Way, everywhere. And I was like saying, "Dennis Murphy, has he come out?" And he hadn't come out. You know, for 3 days we did that. And we put up the missing posters. And the same day that we were putting the missing posters up was the same day that we found out that he didn't make it. You know, that's so hard to hear that. You know, because those 3 days, we had hope. We had hope that he'd make it through. You know, and there was many families that were like that would thought that they'd make it through, but he didn't. But I know my uncle, and my uncle was strong, and he was a strong man. I mean, there's pictures of him in the paper protesting about saving a tree outside Grenfell, 1 tree outside Grenfell, but he was protesting to save it, because that's the sort of man he was. And I thought to myself, what would my uncle do? What would he do in this situation? He'd either be kicking up a fuss at the council, or he'd be trying to help the kids. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do. And I'm in touch with Grenfell United and some of the people from there, and the group we've set up to give the kids a bloody brilliant Christmas. I mean, we've got plans to make this brilliant for them. And we've roped in the local community and everything. We've got survivors on our board, we've got evacuees, we've got the local residents, we've got volunteers who were working right from the start to make this work. And we've got GoFundMe, and we've raised some good money. And we've been out shopping today to get the presents. Jesus, it's hard, you know. But we've done it, you know, and it's going to be a great event. And it's run by the community, focused by the community, for the community. And that's the one thing that's come through from all of this. From the first day that I went down looking for information about my uncle to right now is the unity of the community. And you need to keep that, because it's the one thing that you lot have all got that many other boroughs and places in the UK don't have. And I'm sorry if I get a bit tearful and I'm talking, but you know, I thank you all from the bottom of my heart, because it is this showing of human emotion and love and care that you all give and you all show that makes this so special. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think for me, it's Well, I found as a journalist that the events at Grenfell I've been haunted by them by far more than anything I've ever had to report in the last 40 years of my reporting career. Iraq, Afghanistan, the rest of it. This was in our time, in our town, to our people. And it was man-made, and it was made by us for tolerating a situation in which such a thing can happen. And it can still happen. I remember arriving at the tower at sort of around 6:30 in the morning, on the morning of the night, and seeing what was going on, and feeling that I had no way into the community that surrounded the tower. I looked for local journalists. There are very few local journalists now because Facebook has taken all the advertising from the local papers and they can afford no journalists. So they're either closed or they don't exist. And I thought then, as I looked around at my colleagues who were also looking for ways into what had happened, ways of communicating with people, the brutal reality was that journalists are part of the elite, and they're not part of the community to whom they broadcast, for whom they write for, or anything else. And we had a huge learning curve to surmount. But I found the community was extraordinarily warm, very receptive to being asked questions and to helping to assist us in understanding what had actually happened. I also thought I had no connection, but I did of course have a connection, as some people here will already know, because 50 days before the fire, I was with the Microsoft billionaire Bill Gates at an event called DebateMate, in which schools were competing with each other in debating competition. And I was there to judge the best floor speech for 12 to 15-year-olds. And the outstanding person was Ferdow's Hashim, age 12. She gave the most beautiful, amazingly constructed speech with passion, with articulate, marvelous usage of language. And I thought, my God, that girl's going to go a long way. And I had no doubt whatever in nominating her, and Bill Gates gave her the prize for the best floor speech. And then on my second day at Grenfell Tower, as I looked along the wall of missing, I saw her on the wall. I could not believe that she could have perished. And for a moment, there was a chance she hadn't. But in fact, within about 24 hours, it became clear that she and her entire family died on the 23rd floor. And there, cut down, was this brilliant child and her lovely family. And so that has spurred me, and I know lots of other people, into trying to do whatever can be done to learn lessons from what has happened and to comfort and to assist and to support those people who have survived and who are in the wider community also affected so deeply by what happened. But I think the thing which also I feel very strongly about is that the national lessons of Grenfell have to be learned. When it first happened, the government was full of promises about dealing with the other 600 towers, about allowing local authorities to claim money for sprinklers. Actually, in our own survey of local authorities who have applied for sprinklers in similar towers, they've all been turned down. And the fact is, if we don't learn from Grenfell, there are Grenfells waiting to happen all over the country. And they also expose the reality that we simply have not prioritized social housing, anything like that. And from this,
voices. It's listening to our voices.
Listening to your voices, listening to the community. It's what the speaker earlier said. You know, politicians have to learn to listen and learn to listen to the community they serve. The problem with Parliament is that it's a very inward-looking box, and it's a funny old box, and it's a rotting box in the sense that it's all falling down. Yes. And in some ways it kind of reflects what's going on inside. And we have to break out of that and go back to the community. We are the most centralized society in Europe. Everything is from the center. Not nearly enough is from the community. And the community has to be empowered, and empowered to change the world locally that we live in. Because the local has suffered from the centralization of power. local authorities have dwindled in their power. Whatever you think of Kensington local authority, it is an extreme one in the sense that it's so rich and has done so little in the past for social housing and for the communities like Grenfell. The fact is, local authorities need to be re-empowered so that local people can speak to local politicians about local issues and get local action. It's no good saying, oh, well, we'll ask the government. It has to work the other way. The government has to talk to and listen to local authorities. Anyway, so I feel there is a national message here that we mustn't lose sight of, because if we do lose sight of it, there will be another disaster. And there will be a continuing disaster, which is the fracture of Britain between the rich and the poor. Not the poor in terms of literally out on the street, but people who don't earn as much as the rich. And that split between those who have and those who have less is not healthy and cannot be allowed to continue in the long run. You know, Scotland today has interestingly increased by very little income tax on the richer segment, third of society. And that really needs to happen across the country in order to enable a real renewal of social housing and a vast expansion of the building of public housing. Every other system has failed. Housing associations, wonderful though they were, are no longer able to fill the void. Affordable housing is a misnomer. They're unaffordable houses. Unaffordable houses. There's no point building affordable housing. People actually simply want to live in a house. Whether they own it or rent it, as long as they have security of tenure, that is really the secret. And in fact, there were people in Grenfell for very long periods of time with real security, and they lost it. They lost everything, and many of them lost their lives. So I just hope that we can learn a national lesson from this terrible, terrible and intimate local disaster. So thank you very much. There's not much we can do except to try to report what you feel and what you think and what you want done. Thank you very much.
And our next speaker is Matt Wrack from the Fire Brigades Union. Make some noise for Matt Wrack.
Well, good evening. Yeah, I'm the General Secretary of the Fire Brigades Union. I was a London firefighter from 1983, and the people who went into that building that night are overwhelmingly members of our union. And it is so I've been around this industry for a very long time, and we've never seen in the UK anything like this, and I think people are still coming to terms with it. And so that's the first point. I think the second point, I'll come back to firefighters in a minute, but I wanted to say something about the walk this evening. I've spent my life going on demonstrations and marches and so on, and when the walks started, I've been to the majority of them now, and I have to say it is an immensely powerful thing to see hundreds and then thousands of people and then the whole community become completely silent. It is remarkably powerful, and I think it brings out emotions in people, and it is something that I will never forget. And if those of you who went on the past few this evening, just next to Ladbroke Grove tube station, the firefighters from North Kensington lined up on either side of the road. And those firefighters who were there this evening are actually the Red Watch, and the Red Watch is the watch who actually responded to the Grenfell Tower fire, and talking to them and just speaking to them, hugging them in fact, you could see the emotion that is there among them. And this is something that the horrors that they saw that evening will live with them forever. And on the first attendance of the London Fire Brigade, there were some 250 firefighters attended. Over the course of 4 days, probably 1,000 London firefighters attended that incident. So and there's 4,500 firefighters in London, so a big proportion of London's firefighters at some point have been involved in the operation at Grenfell Tower. So there's lots of people who've seen lots of pretty horrible things that as I say, they won't ever forget. Now, firefighting is clearly designed to deal with hazardous situations, fires, floods, road traffic collisions, and so on. And we develop procedures for doing this as safely and as effectively as possible. But the truth is that that incident was not planned for. And so I spoke to one guy who was on the 3rd floor running, sending people into different parts of the building, and he said that it was like drawing on the effectively hundreds of years of experience, everyone making it up as they went along, using their experience to say, how do we adapt what we know to something that we've never seen before or prepared for? And that was quite a remarkable thing to see how they adapted and broke procedures, broke rules all the way through the incident in order to try and save as many lives as they could. And I think somebody just mentioned it again tonight to me, that despite that, clearly they rescued lots and lots of people. Very, very late into the incident. Remarkable that some people were still alive in flats and firefighters managed to get to them and get people out. But of course they were not able to save many people as well, and I think that's something that weighs heavily on people's minds, both those who were there and those who weren't there. And clearly that's something that firefighters will have to deal with and come to terms with over a very long time. And I think one thing that I found quite, again, moving is their wish to engage with the community. So we had, at the last month's march, we had firefighters who came down from Birmingham, from West Midlands, who just wanted to come on the evening walk for Grenfell, because this is firefighters across the world are discussing Grenfell and what they would have done in that situation. So it is there's a remarkable, and I think what we need to do is build that alliance between our people who were sent into that building, or asked to go into that building, or wanted to go into that building to try and save lives, and the community who's been so devastated by that fire, or as we've called it from very early on, an atrocity. Because that's what I think it is. It's not an atrocity caused by war or by terror or by terrorism, but nevertheless, for that number of people to be killed in their own homes in one of the richest boroughs in the country, I think is disgusting, frankly. And something needs to be done about it. Sorry?
What about the lies about the number of people as well?
Well, I think it raises an interesting point. I think that what needs to happen in terms of challenging those in authority is we need to be utterly forensic and rigorous in challenging everything that is said. We're core participants in the public inquiry, and the public inquiry, as you know, started with 2 procedural hearings this week. And we made very detailed submissions. Obviously our expertise in relation to fire and fire safety and fire regulations and firefighting operations. And we've made already very detailed submissions and criticisms of how the inquiry is being conducted. Because for us, people clearly need to be held to account over what happened at Grenfell Tower. And people talk about whether this is politicising the issue or not. The truth is this, it strikes me, that when you make decisions about social housing or about public safety, they are inevitably and by definition political decisions. They are made by politicians and therefore they are political decisions. So we can't avoid that this is a political issue. And the decisions that are made, whether it's about putting cladding on buildings or how buildings are renovated, they operate in within an environment. So for us, if people need to be held to account, that's fair enough, and they should be. But if that means that at the end of the day, a subcontractor of a subcontractor of a subcontractor who was screwing a bit of cladding onto a building is the person who gets held to account, to me, that won't answer the real questions. The question really is how have we got a regime that even allows flammable cladding to be put on the outside of buildings? And as John Snow has just said, that we find out further down the line that there are hundreds of buildings with flammable cladding that has been applied to the outside of them. And this stuff is basically made of petroleum. We've wrapped buildings, we've drilled them full of holes. So when Grenfell Tower was built, the architects who built it designed fire safety and fire protection into the very construction of the building. And over time, we have undermined that fire protection that was built into those buildings. And we have to ask why.
The tenant said that.
The tenant said that. And actually, this goes back a long time. The first cladding fire that caused a death in Great Britain was in 1999 in North Ayrshire. At Garnet, a fire called Garnet, a place called Garnet Court. And actually, if you look at the submissions that the Fire Brigades Union made, immediately aftermath of that, we raised issues about flammable cladding that clearly should not be applied to buildings. So this is from 90. This is not a new issue. This is something that those in authority knew about. So we've got huge challenges for either for the local community, for ourselves, and actually for anyone who cares a jot about justice, that we've got to ensure that this public inquiry is not a whitewash, and I think lots of people are very worried that it's going to become a whitewash. And I think, I have to say, we've been very clear that actually if it becomes a whitewash, we're perfectly prepared to walk away from it. If that's what us and others decide to do. So there's a challenge to those running that inquiry. Actually, they keep saying that the community, the bereaved, the survivors and the local community are going to be central to it. Well, that first thing they need to do is start listening to those people if they're serious about that. So this is a huge challenge, I think, to all of us. And I think it should, people keep saying, and people in the fire service and senior people in the fire service and government ministers have said to me, this needs to be a turning point. Well, it does need to be a turning point. But saying it needs to be a turning point and it actually becoming a turning point are two very, very different things. And I'm not convinced currently that it is going to be a turning point unless we carry on campaigning, we carry on fighting, and we fight for justice for Grenfell. Thanks very much.
Attilla the Stockbroker.
I'm so moved and honoured to be here tonight. I'm from the Sussex coast. I have links to West London. My dad was a QPR fan, and in the 80s, in the late 70s, early 80s, we did lots of stuff around here. I remember the Ladbroke Grove Skins. I remember the Battle of Acklam Hall, anti-fascist stuff, rock against racism. Anyway. A few days after the fire, when I just basically listened, obviously I was as horrified as everybody from looking from where I was in West Sussex, and I just listened to what was going on, and I listened to what was being said, and a few days later I wrote this. It's called Keeping Up Appearances. The clue's in the name, Royal Borough. We serve Knightsbridge, not Latimer Road. We're here for our quality voters with a moneyed and tasteful postcode. We tolerate you since we have to, and we hope that you'll soon move elsewhere. Until then, we'll do our legal duty. If you cause any problems, beware. Your flats are all crumbling eyesores. Your neighbours are your social betters. They paid millions to live in this area. Some are next door to scroungers and debtors. So it's time to refurbish your building. Not with fire doors, sprinklers and care, but with cladding to make it look nicer so the rich can pretend you're not there. It's unsafe, you complain. That's just rubbish. We've been running it that way for years. Just be grateful you're housed in this borough and make sure that you're not in arrears. You've new skins on your homes, they look lovely. Regulations and standards are met, all done legally and within budget. So get on with your lives and don't fret. Those new skins cause the ghastly inferno. But that council is still in control. That some shall be charged with manslaughter and the rest are relieved of their role. Now the people cried justice for Grenfell in the name of those folk left alone in a world where appearances mattered more than flesh, skin, hair, muscle and bone. Thank you. And I want to do one more, because it didn't half remind me of something else. A memory seared into my brain since I was 9 years old. Now this starts off as just a nice poem about being a 9-year-old on the Sussex coast, and then turns into something else. And it's called My 9th Birthday. Some of you old enough will remember this. I'm sure it won't surprise you to learn I was a proper little show-off. Too clever by half, said my Victorian grandmother who lived in the flat downstairs. You spoil him, Muriel. Children should be seen and not heard. Be quiet, John. When you begin to pay a little, then you can begin to say a little. There were plenty more such epithets. If I asked what was for tea on the days she was in charge of me, she'd always say, air pie and a walk round, or bread and pullet. And when she read about the latest exploits of the royal family or anyone else remotely wealthy or privileged in the pages of her beloved Daily Express, she'd often exclaim with heartfelt approval, it's not for the likes of us. When, years later, I read The Ragged Trouser Philanthropist by Robert Tressel and heard that particular servile catchphrase again, I felt retrospectively vindicated in my instinctive determination back then to do the exact opposite of nearly everything she told me. Despite my grandmother's best efforts, I was seen, heard and then some, in school and out. Self-assured and confident, playing the violin and recorder, writing little poems and songs and about to begin a massive project about the American Civil War based on the battle stories printed on the back of the unbelievably gory bubblegum picture cards we boys bought on our way to school. Cards with titles like Crushed by the Wheels, Wall of Corpses and Messenger of Death. If you're male and over 50, you may well remember. My form teacher liked me and let me help other kids in class. I had lots of friends, and if wannabe bullies hit me, I hate them back. Like I say, a proper little show-off. It was my 9th birthday. At Manaar Hall Junior School in Southwick, West Sussex, when it was your birthday, you couldn't wait till lunchtime, but you had to. Then you stood in front of everyone else in the canteen. A big, colourful plastic cake was brought out with proper candles on it. You blew out the candles. Everyone sang happy birthday, even the kids who thought you were a show-off wanker. The teachers made sure of that. And you got the chance to grab a handful of sweets from a big jar. As far as I can remember, I was the only one with a birthday that day, so I had everyone's undivided attention. But I never got to show off. And I didn't want to show off. My 9th birthday was different. It was October the 21st, 1966. Before we went to the canteen for lunch and my little birthday cameo, we were told there was going to be a special assembly in the school hall. Everyone wondered what had happened. Even I realised they wouldn't have one just because it was my birthday. The headmaster, Mr. Young, came looking very sad and told us that earlier that day, a huge mountain of coal waste had engulfed a junior school like ours in a Welsh mining village called Awan, and many children the same age as us had lost their lives. He asked us to pray for them. We all did. Some of us cried. They still sang happy birthday in the canteen a few minutes later, but it wasn't a happy birthday at all. I kept thinking about those children. After I got home and talked to my parents and had my birthday tea with my friends, I tried to write a poem for Awan, but I couldn't. The poem I wanted to write was far too big for a 9-year-old. We did a collection at school. The money was sent to the disaster fund, and then, as happens when you're a child with supportive parents at a supportive school, other things quickly came along to take the sadness away. But on my birthday for the next few years, I always thought about the children of Awan. Years later, I learned about the underground springs below Colliery Waste at number 7 on the hill above the village, which caused the coal waste to turn to slurry and crash down on the school. Springs easily spotted on maps which were never even consulted. I learned about the negligence of the authorities and the insensitivity of the press. Some things never change. I learned about the father who, as the inquest into his child's death declared the cause to be asphyxia and multiple injuries, shouted out, "No, sir, buried alive by the National Coal Board." I learned how a ruling was made that parents had somehow to prove their children's deaths had caused them anguish before they could benefit from the disaster fund, and that some of the money from that fund was used to clear the other waste tips above Aberfan because the Coal Board refused to pay for it to be done. I learned about the long-term psychological effects of the disaster on the whole village. In short, I learned how the lives of working class people, of working class children, were held cheap. So cheap. But that was much later. Back then, I was a child. A proper little show-off who didn't want to show off his 9th birthday, trying to write a poem for children like him, for the children of Aberfan. Thanks. 50 years later, nothing learned. Now I'm going to do one more for you. It is an honour to be here, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. It's funny, it's silly, it's a wind-up, it's satirical, it's about the future. Obviously, the disgusting attitudes of the press are all around us. We can combat so much of it with social media, taking the piss out of them and the gullible people that believe them is an essential part of that. So this is one's for all of you, because this is about the way we change this shit. Because we are protesting everything, but we have to get rid of the scum that are doing this. We have to get rid of the scum of the council. We have to get rid of the scum who are running the country, and we all know that. Just look at us with the Scourge of the Land, with Jeremy Corbyn's favourite band. We all eat babies, and we're commies too. We've all got AIDS, and we'll give it to you. With scaly tails and horns and hooves, we undermine everything that moves. You can read about us in the right-wing press, the Sun, the Mail, and the Express, but don't mess with us, because we're lefties, and we smell. We're the Corbyn supporters from hell. If your telly goes wrong or your car won't start, you can bet your life we played our part. If your team doesn't win or you miss the bus, 10 to 1, it's all down to us. If a dog runs off with your copy of The Sun and brings it back with a crossword done, if your pet hamster wakes up dead or you find a squatter in your bed, we did it! And everything else as well, because we're Corbyn supporters from hell. We made your pub serve proper beer. We banned those broadcasts of Top Gear. We're all pacifists, Muslims, gay, and members of the IRA. We bring in asylum seekers and make you pay for their new sneakers. We won't sing songs for the Queen. We think X Factor is obscene, but don't mess with us. Because we're lefties and we smell. We're the Corbyn supporters from hell. Thanks, everybody. Justice for Grenfell.
Steve Divall from St Helen's Church. You ran a report for Steve Divall.
We're based a couple of clicks north of where the tower is, so my main role was to try and support things that were happening elsewhere. I guess like a lot of people in this room, I wanted to ask, well, can I do anything to help? What can I do to help? Mo and I managed to show a bit of local leadership and managed to get some people into homes on the first night, which was a lovely contribution to be able to make. I found that being 6'4" and wearing a dog collar, people noticed me, and they expected me to know what was going on because nobody else seemed to know what was going on, so we'll ask the vicar. And so I found suddenly I was sort of holding lots of offers that people had made, and I thought, oh yeah, the best thing I can do is link this person to this person, and so that was the small contribution I could make. But I was moved, like I'm sure everyone in this room, just by what happened spontaneously as the world's biggest kind of free food festival just emerged and erupted on the streets by the evening. Actually, I because I live a couple of clicks away, I slept really badly that night because of the helicopters, but didn't get there till 8 o'clock in the morning. And my first impression was that it was some of the really practical kind of single mums with their prams who were probably at the poorer end of our community, who were taking leadership in providing for their neighbours. I overheard a conversation between two ladies. I'm off to Poundland to buy some more water. I'm off to buy nappies. And I just thought, wow, this is humanity at its best. That actually, as a community, we stepped into that gap, that vacuum. And as we go forward, 6 months afterwards, got to get through the winter, what are we going to do next year? How's it going to be different? We all want it to be different. We all want to come together, stay together, and I realise that part of the answer is better political campaigning, and we need to host hustings at St Helens because we've got a marginal constituency, which is quite exciting. So there's potential opportunity of change there, but it's not just get some new politicians, that'll sort it all out. We as a community need to, want to, I hope, continue to say, what can we do together? And I don't know the answer to that, other than I've got a part to play and serve you. And I guess that's my heart, and as I go into Christmas, there's lots of criticism of those in power who use their power for themselves. And I offer the example of the one who's described as though he was equal with God, though he was in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing. Taking the very nature of a servant, he humbled himself. And I want to say, on my best days, that's my inspiration. Whatever's your inspiration as part of this community, let's be the people that we have the potential to be together. Let's help each other as a community to be the community we have the potential to be. I think that's our heart. I guess this is an experience to me. I'm not preaching a sermon, but I get a sense that we're there tonight. And so I just thought, well, I'm not going to lead in prayer. That's not the meeting we've come to, but I do want to say, let's have a moment or two, just to maybe you've been campaigning for the last 6 months and you're exhausted and need a bit of a break, but what is it in the new year that you're going to keep campaigning for? Maybe you've been a community activist. We've had people speaking who've been doing it for years to make this a better community. What is it next for you? Maybe like me, you're still carrying a burden of, I'd love to be able to do more. Well, what are we going to do or campaign for or write about? Or maybe let's just have a moment or two and ask that question personally.
And our final speaker for tonight is Moyra Samuels from Justice for Grenfell. Moyra Samuels.
Oh, thank you for having me. I feel like I've been picked on. I'm absolutely exhausted. I've been at the memorial this morning. I've been on the silent march, and here I am. And I've been chosen to speak last. I think it's because you know I'm a member of the SWP, isn't it? Come on, you all read the Daily Mail, I know.
Get it delivered, Moyra.
It's 6 months. And I tell you what, people, it's been a tough 6 months. I think we'll all agree it's been a really, really tough 6 months. And thinking about reflecting today, as I was sitting in St Paul's, I was reflecting on the 6 months that have gone by, and there were kind of 3 sort of key emotions that came to me. I'll talk about those emotions. First of all, I live about 300 meters from the tower, and on the night, I got up very quickly out of my bed. First of all, because my children alerted me to the fire. My daughter was pregnant, She's now had twins. I'm a granny. But she experienced the fire, and we don't talk about the trauma that she's been through. But they alerted me to the fire, and the reason I jumped up really, really quickly was because Ed Darfin had called me the night before, and we were going to meet. We were going to meet to talk about all the campaigns, all the fights we've been having in this community to actually save services for ordinary working class people, because we've been attacked for ages. We all know what they are. We know we've been fighting to save Silchester and not go for the council's decision to demolish it. We've been fighting for our library. We've been fighting for the college. We've been fighting with Westway 23, you know, with all, from the stables to Maxilla to the flyover. We've been fighting all of those campaigns, and we were going to meet to talk about that. And then I didn't take Ed's call. And so at 2:30 in the morning, I suddenly went, Ed, and dashed off to watch the fire. So for me, I'm very blessed. I knew people who I knew as my neighbors, but also personally I knew Ed. And I'm so grateful that actually Ed was, survived the fire. It's been a whirlwind since then. I mean, obviously, because I live very close, and so I feel like I'm right in the center of all of it. But just, it's a whirlwind in a sense of me thinking about our community. And the three key emotions that come to my mind are pride, sadness, and anger. And I think of the sadness, I think of this morning. Some of you may well have been in the service this morning. You know, a lot of us actually couldn't stop ourselves from crying. Especially I wept when I saw the bereaved families, you know, file out of the service with pictures of their loved ones. And the reason that I wept so much when I looked at those communities is that they came from the black and minority ethnic communities, predominantly. And those are the communities that have been facing, for the last decade in particular, under Cameron's government, attacks, if it's not Islamophobia, if it's not anti-immigration rhetoric. Those communities have been facing those systematically. And I looked at those communities and my heart just broke. I've also felt enormous sadness because we've lost in our communities enormous talent, enormous gifts of children. They've lost their potential. We've lost families. You know, whole families have been wiped out. And I think all of us have talked about that kind of sadness on the night. And, you know, the sadness that continued if you were on the silent march today. But I feel enormous pride. I think we all feel enormous pride of our community. You know, I feel enormous pride at the way that we sprung without any direction. You know, people say that human beings are naturally greedy and self-centered. I don't believe that. If you saw how people behaved after the fire, you know that actually most people, if they're not pulled to the daily fail, or they're pulled to, you know, competition of some sort, are actually decent, caring human beings. And that was demonstrated in our community. It was demonstrated not only from our community, but right across London. And, you know, that's held a lot of us together, the actual unity of our community, the solidarity and the generosity, really. People have been generous in their time. You know, I've been working with the campaign, volunteering. You know, I don't have people, there's rumors around the community that somehow that we get huge sums of money. We don't get any money at all. We have enormous support from the unions, which is where we go into for our support. And that's where we should go for our support. Because actually the unions, especially the fire brigade, are the people who've been on the ground. And lots of the unions will support us because they have members, not only in the tower, but they have members right across the country who are facing very similar conditions. Unions who are facing cuts, whether it's the NHS, whether it's housing, you know, whether it's social services, which was why there were not enough people. Why do we have all these volunteers? Because actually social services has been cut to the bleeding bone. Why is it that the mental health services were so sporadic? Why isn't it even now? It's so uneven because of all the cuts that have been made. You know, so that's why we have this enormous solidarity from right across the country. You know, and I feel proud, but I feel completely overwhelmed in some way, because I don't know about you guys, but I think the whole country is looking at us. The whole country is looking at us to see how we're going to push this through. Because actually, Grenfell, as we all know, is not just about our communities. Grenfell is about systematic austerity that has been imposed on us for decades. Grenfell is about social cleansing that goes right across London. Grenfell is about a neoliberal agenda that says it's profit first and people second. And I think that's why we have the solidarity right across the country. And I think that that, for us, means that we need to face this for the future, going into the new year 6 months on. How are we going to actually take this on? How are we going to fight against this? I feel that actually we cannot continue to have the narrative about social housing continued. We cannot. You know, where actually in the 70s, apparently 50% of the country lived in social housing, and now we have 17% of people living in social housing. And actually anyone who lives in social housing is considered to be on benefits or actually poor. That's not the case. I live in a housing association. I love living in social housing. I want to live in social housing. And I think a lot of us do. So we need to actually change that narrative. And I think that's going to be the challenge for us in the new year. But also I think Grenfell, for me, what's happening in Grenfell makes me enormously angry. And I think that anger is something that I hope is going to spur all of us in the new year to continue to fight for justice. Because I tell you what, people, it's not going to get any easier. We've had 6 months of pummeling. We've had to come together as a community. We've had to hold our breath. We've had to keep our eyes on the prize. But the inquiry is opening. So we know that actually things are going to get a little bit dirty. And in particular, I think that actually, if anybody's watching the inquiry, you know, just thinking about this morning and the BME community filing out, what was the key issues that was raised in the first 2 days of the inquiry? Question of diversity, the question of inclusion, the fact that actually the community had to travel, the fact that actually 50% of the people who died in that fire were Muslim. Is there anywhere for people to eat around Holborn who are Muslim? Or is there any childcare? What happens about actually disability access? You know, all these questions about diversity and about hearing the voice, really hearing the voice of those people who died, and the families of those people who died, and those people who survived, is really, really important. And so I think that actually for the future, we're going to have to get together. We're going to have to call on those people who sit in Parliament, and there are many who sit in Parliament. We have a Labour MP. We're going to have to put pressure on all of them to actually start supporting this community and start coming out publicly to actually support the Grenfell survivors, especially in rehousing them. And I was sitting in the back talking to Robert about the housing issue. So for the Justice campaign, in the short term, housing the survivors is the key issue. I don't know if anybody else can understand why they have not housed people yet. Why have only 40 households out of 206 been housed in permanent housing? What on earth is going on? You know, and personally, and I think the campaign thinks this, we believe that actually the council have retreated to their default position. They've gone back to how they house people in emergency housing in need before Grenfell. Because there's an acute lack of imagination, there's an acute lack of leadership, there's an acute lack of will. So in the short term, that's what Grenfell, the Justice for Grenfell campaign will focus on, is ensuring that actually the question of housing is kept in the public domain. Also, and I think most of us agree with this, accountability. You know, a lot of us in this room know who made those decisions at that meeting on that night to actually, you know, save costs on cladding. A lot of us know who the councillors were who actually refused to install the sprinklers, and who actually didn't listen to the voices of the residents of Grenfell. And I think that actually one of the things that we know will provide justice for the survivors and the bereaved family, and certainly for this community, is if those people are bloody locked up. Nothing short of, I'm sorry. So, for the new year, I hope that actually, you know, Grenfell happened 5 days after a lot of us, including myself, was down at Town Hall when Emma was elected. You know, we were all, in particular young people, we all wanted something different. You know, the Corbyn Manifesto provided us with something different, we hoped. So I think looking forward, I think that actually we need to keep the fight on the streets. There are a load of barristers, there's a load of legal representatives in that inquiry, but they're never going to be successful because they weren't in the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. They're never going to be successful if we don't keep the fight on the street, outside, and in our communities. Justice for Grenfell. Thank you.